Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. I can hear me. Excellent. Okay. My name is John Stevenson. I'm a developer evangelist for Salesforce. So that means I basically help everybody who's interested kind of get onto the platform, understand it, understand where they can use it, and have some fun with it as well. So one of the things that we discovered, we've been doing some hackathons. Was anybody at the hackathon at the weekend? No? Excellent, because if you had, this would be an incredibly boring session for you, because this is something that we've learned. So one of the things we got the people to do at the hackathon was to actually take their metadata and any code that they're building in their app and put it into Git version control. And if you've never used Git before, it can seem quite daunting. Once you've used it a few times, it gets easier, and the more you use it, it then becomes quite natural to kind of use. So for developers, they pick up on that fairly easily, but even admins can pick it up pretty quickly as well. I say even admins, there's nothing wrong with admins. I love admins too. Admins are people as well. Just as a survey, who in the room would consider them as more of an admin than a developer? Excellent, thank you. I love you too. So the rest of you guys consider yourself more developer kind of role? Yeah, a few nods. Okay. So this is a fairly gentle introduction, so it's hopefully suitable for everybody, possibly even managers. If there's not any managers in the room, no. Oh, one or two, excellent. Yes. So you'll be able to kind of help people understand what they can do, what the opportunities are here as well. So essentially, one of the things we get asked about is, well, how can we kind of manage all the changes inside Salesforce? So this is one way of doing things. It's not the canonical, it's not the silver bullet to answer all the problems in the world, but it's a kind of fairly simple technique I'm going to show you to kind of help start that journey of managing and controlling versions and change inside Salesforce. Safe harbor, so don't listen to what I say, understand what's actually available and make your purchasing decisions on that. That's all I'm going to say about safe harbor. So why manage changes inside your Salesforce org? Well, that's a very good question. So you want to understand what's actually being built. Now, when you've got a mixture of roles such as admin and developers, then if it's a perfect world, they talk to each other and they actually tell each other what they're doing. And sometimes they don't always tell each other what they're doing. So they may build something in code that they don't need to, or they may write some code on top of objects, and admins don't necessarily know where they are able to delete those objects without breaking things, because they don't know what developers have written in code. But if you version things, you have a little bit more information about what's been added. It makes it a bit easier to document all the changes inside your org as well. And so that people have more information to rely on. They don't just have to rely on each other, they can rely on the information that's in the system that they've used to version Salesforce. And obviously, of course, if somebody kindly introduces a little bug, then it's a little bit easier to actually help you find that bug and fix it a lot quicker than normal. So when you're just doing sort of development in Java or C# or Perl or whatever, it's kind of very, very strange not to use a version control system to be able to manage all these changes, because we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have little errors. We all have off days where something just doesn't go right. And having the right kind of tools can support us in our efforts. And there's no reason why you can't use that for Salesforce as well. So we're going to specifically talk about a tool for version control called Git. Has anybody heard of Git before? Whoa. Okay. Now, has anybody used Git before? Oh dear. Right, you can all leave now. Okay. You probably already know all this already, but if you don't, nearly, there we go. If you don't, then hopefully this will kind of reinforce some of your understanding already. And if we need to go further, then feel free to ask questions as well. So, has anybody used things like Subversion, CVS, things like that? And keep your hands up if you enjoyed using those. Okay, there's a few. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with them. It's better than nothing. It's better than just versioning your files by coming it's like document 1, document 2, document 3. But there are some limitations, especially when you want to merge things together. So you have people working on the same document, the same file, the same source code, the same objects at the same time, but on different computers, and you want to bring all that together. That's called merging, and that can be a challenge using the subversion model because it manages changes based on a file. So if you rename the file, call it something else, then Subversion doesn't know it's the same file as the original file because it's based on the file name. Whereas Git has a lot more intelligence about when changes actually take place. So it kind of bases its changes around something called a change set. So it kind of does a difference across all the files. So if you change the file name, it knows you've changed the file name, and it kind of can manage that a lot easier. So merges tend to be a lot easier to manage in Git. And it also encourages you to make smaller changes as well. So some people using Subversion spend weeks and weeks avoiding kind of merging because it can be difficult, and then that just makes merging even more difficult. But when you're using Git, you can commit locally all the time, so you can build up a set of small changes as you go, and then it's so much easier to merge some or all of them with the other work that people are doing. One of the nice things, because you've got this local repository, we call this, to manage all those changes, you don't need to be connected. So if you're flying over to Dreamforce, you can still do coding and version it along the way. If you're writing some documentation, you can version that as well. If you're trying to connect to Salesforce, if your plane's got Wi-Fi, then you can still do that. But you don't have to wait for the server to be there to actually use Git, so it's a nice advantage. It's only when you actually come to share your changes that you do need a network connection as well. Distributed version control, it's change sets, I've said that already. So you've basically got these four kind of steps. So you've got the working copy. This will be your, when you're coding, this is your source code. This is your Java, your Apex code. When it comes to Salesforce, it's the XML files that are your definition for your standard objects, for your custom objects, sorry, and for your page layouts. Everything that you kind of do on Salesforce, you may be aware that that is actually XML files that you're actually creating. It's a whole bunch of XML. And you can download them onto your computer and version them as XML files. And that's something that Git works with. It works really well with text files. You can version image files, but it's a bit harder to actually compare the changes with binary files, image files. But with text files, there's lots of tools to help you see the lines that have changed. So in the code or the XML, you can see very clearly which bits have changed and who introduced the nice friendly bug for you as well. So you've got the working copy, which is the code, and then you've got like a staging area, temporary area, where you can build up the things that you want to make the next version of your product or of your app. And then you can make a decision, okay, all these changes I want to bundle up as one commit, one version, and they go into my local repository. And I might do that several times, and then after an hour or so, I think, well, all these changes I've done, all these commits I've done, they're worth sharing with somebody else now. I'm quite happy with them. So I'll share them with somebody else, and you can put them onto GitHub, or you might have your own Git server internally, or you might use some other services like Atlassian's Bitbucket. So there's quite a few options there how you can share that with the rest of your team. So the first three are all local on your computer, and then the fourth one is how you share it with the rest of the world. And so you end up going through this kind of process. So you have your working copy, and there's John, that's me, hello. I'm a bit thinner there, actually. This was before cramming for Dreamforce. And so simply, there are some simple commands. You don't need to use the command line to do Git. There are some nice tools I'm going to show you. But these are the commands you would use. So you would add the files you wanted that had the changes in that you wanted to manage. You could use Git status to check if you weren't sure what had changed, you can just do Git status and it shows you what the changes are. And if you want to see the details of those changes, you can do a diff. Basically, show me the difference between two files or two different versions, and it will show you the lines. It will highlight the lines and show you what exactly has changed. So rather than just saying 2 files have changed, well, line 53 has changed, line 47 has changed, this word in line 47 has changed. You can see that. And then you do a commit, which is creating your version. And you can see all the versions you created using git log. And then to start it all, you actually do a git init to create a local repo as well. So if you've tried Git before and you thought it was complicated, it's because you didn't realize that these are the only things you really need to know. And if you, to get started, to get using it, to get comfortable with it, and you can use an IDE on top of that as well, a little graphical tool on top of that, which makes it a lot easier. So talking of tools, what can you use? So one really easy tool I found to use is something called GitHub for Mac OS X or GitHub for Windows. So if you're on those systems, you can download those 2 tools, and they're a very graphical tool. And we're going to show you some snippets from that to show you how easy they are to use. One of the most important things you need to do when you first start using Git is to tell Git who you are. If you remember, you're going to use Git to collaborate with other people, hopefully. And so, especially if you're going to share things with GitHub or some kind of remote repository, then you need to tell Git what your name is and what your email address is. And again, GUI tools will help you do this if you don't want to use the command line. If you do use the command line, you can basically just use these 2 commands. So that's how you would start. You would install the tool, you would identify yourself to Git, and you're ready to start versioning your project. So yeah, you can download that. That's just the Mac view. And so if you're using the tool, you basically, here I'm just logging into GitHub. So I already created an account on GitHub. I'm just logging into there, and I'm doing my git config. So basically just specifying my name and my email address, and that's just the ones I've used on GitHub. It even lets me install command line tools if I do want to try that. And then it'll show me if I've got any repositories on GitHub already, it'll allow me to download them. If you're just starting, then this will be blank. So that's Git. So that's the tool that helps you the basic tool that helps you manage and version your source code and your objects. There's also GitHub, which allows you to, again, share your code, your objects with everybody else in the world. You can also have private repositories as well if you've got some special secret stuff that you're building, or some IP stuff you're building. You can have a private repository, but by default, everything else is there. It's on public, which is a nice way. There's lots of open source projects there. You can see what other people have done. The evangelists have a repository as well, where you can go and see what the code is and all the things that we've built. You can go and download those and play with those as well yourself. So the 2 things that GitHub actually add is this idea of forking and pull requests. So forking is basically, say I've put a really amazing demo on GitHub and you want to play with it, but you also want to do more than that. You want to extend it. You want to add features to it. So you would fork my repository, so basically creating a complete copy, but also on GitHub as well, so other people can see what your changes are. If you want to. And so then you can basically use your version of my project on GitHub to build whatever you want, and you have full access to that. So if you wanted to change my code on my repository, you'd have to be nice to me, or you'd have to ask me to do it for you. But if you wanted to make changes, you could create a complete fork of your own, and then you could change whatever you wanted to. You had complete control over that repository, and you can make it even better, or you can break it, whatever you desire. If you do want to share a change with me, you can add changes to your own fork, and then on GitHub there's a button to say, I want a pull request. I want to take these changes I've done, and I want to give them back to the original person I forked my repository from, and that's called a pull request. And then, so you create a change, you do a pull request, I then have a look at that, I can compare, I can see the changes you've added to the project, and I can decide, I can do a code review, I can do an XML review, and decide whether I want to incorporate them back into my project as well. So it's this whole idea of social coding. So how do you get started with GitHub? basically just create an account on GitHub. And you can also, if you don't want to type in your password all the time, you can also add a public key. This is just a secure way to identify yourself with GitHub, and it just means that you can just do git push all the time without having to type in your password, because you've got a secret little encrypted key on your computer, and Git knows that you are who you say you are every time you're using it. So that's basically the process, so what I've described. So I'm working locally. I can create a repository on GitHub, and then other people can fork it and play around with it and do a pull request if they want to, whereas Carlos here, he's only taken a copy of my repository locally on his machine. So he has to be very nice to me if he wants his change in my repository. He has to ask me nicely, because he can't push it in there himself. He's got no way to give me a pull request, so he'd have to kind of get in touch with me some other way. Okay, so let's use Git and GitHub to manage Salesforce.org. There we go. So does that make sense? Okay. Does everybody kind of get a basic idea of Git and GitHub? Yes, nobody's running out the room screaming. Excellent. So let's create a repository on GitHub. So a repository is where you're going to manage all your changes. So I've got an account on GitHub called jrocket, because that's my Twitter address and everything else like that. And I'm just giving it a name, and this Salesforce1 gardening app. So for people who want to manage their gardening activities, I've got an allotment, so I manage plants and stuff like that. And so this is just a repository I'm going to create so I can share all my excellent development on Salesforce with the rest of the world. I'm going to make it public. I'm going to put README in so that I can describe what the project's all about. And then I'm going to create a repository. And then I can either just download it with the command line tools, or there's also an option to launch the desktop tool, the GitHub for Mac, GitHub for Windows, if you have it installed, by clicking the clone in desktop. And you can just actually run the GitHub for Mac Windows tool, and basically just click plus to add repositories. And then you can just type in the name of the, so you select clone, type in the name of the repository I've created. So it'll be S1 gardening, and it shows it up because it knows it's already connected to my account. And then I just clone the gardening app. So cloning, again, is just to copy what's already in that repository onto my local computer, onto my laptop, so I can play with it and make changes there. Okay. And then it's copied, and there aren't, because I haven't done any changes locally, then it's not picking up anything. But if I started doing changes, so there'll be a README file in there, because that's what I've created, so I can start typing in the description of my project in the README file. And as soon as I press save, the nice thing about the tool is it will pick up those changes, and they will be there, and all I'll need to do is just type a little message saying what I've changed. So it's kind of that, it can be that easy to actually do. This is why I quite like this tool. It's very nice and simple to actually get started. You don't need to remember all the commands. You just need to remember the basic process. Show me the metadata. So who loves metadata? Yay! Excellent. We all love metadata, because without it, we wouldn't be able to do anything. And so you can access, if you're a developer, you may be using Force.com IDEs. Anybody using Force.com IDE? A few people. There's also Maven's Mate. Ooh, excellent. Ooh, yeah, a few more people there. If you haven't seen this, it's a nice lightweight tool. So if you're not already doing Java development, it might be a nice alternative for you to do that. It's basically built on top of the Sublime text editor. That's quite a nice tool there. And you can do all the things that, well, more or less all the things that Force.com can do as well. And then there's a command line tool. Has anybody used the Force.com? Oh, there's a few. Excellent. If you haven't done the Force.com command line tool yet, it is quite simple. It is using the command line. It's not as difficult as you may think it is. It's just a matter of remembering a few things. And after you've used it quite a while, those commands kind of just are burnt into your memory. There is a really nice talk this afternoon around 5 o'clock all about the command line tool, if you want to learn that. So have a look out for that. So those are the options for getting the metadata out of Salesforce. So here I created a gardening app. So let's have a look at that. It's very exciting. I think I've got a whole 2 objects in there. So I've got plants and I've got varieties. So there's not a huge amount of things in there. So I can go into plants. I can plant of a certain variety. And is my internet working? It's going very slow. Oh, I didn't use the presenter's Wi-Fi. Oops, that's why it's slow. There we go. And, oh, that's not available. No. Oh, okay. Okay. Let's go back to this then. So, this is my gardening app. It has some stuff in, and I want to start making a version of it. So, I used to do a lot of Java development previously, and one of the mistakes people made was writing all this code and not versioning it, and then not knowing what they'd done and not being able to unpick it all. So we try and encourage people to make versions as often as possible. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be doing this in Salesforce as well. Once you get into the routine, it's very easy to very quickly pull down the metadata, put it into Git, and you know what it is. So if you need to go back, or if you need to understand what you've just done today, sometimes you have very busy days and you're pulled and pushed everywhere and you can't quite remember what it is that you've done. You can always look back in the tool if you're versioning if you're versioning every hour, every half an hour or so, then you've got more of a history of what you've done over that day. So your poor brain doesn't have to remember everything that you've done because the tools can do that for you. So one of my preferred ways to do it is just to create an unmanaged package. If you're using Force.com IDE, you pretty much got most of the XML down there already when you pull down that in your project. But if you're not using that tool, then you can create a package, and it just needs to be an unmanaged package. It doesn't need to be anything special. If all you're doing is just doing a connected app, then you may need to use the managed package. But for just doing the sort of standard Salesforce development, you create a package. You just give it a name. The package name doesn't really make much difference. It's going to use the app name that I'm using. I'm going to add an app to this package, and that's the important name. So creating something called Dreamforce, I'm just going to give it a description. And then I've got a package ready, and I'm just going to select app. If you didn't use an app, if you're just creating objects, then you would just select a different component type and just add add the components manually one by one. As soon as you select app, then it shows up all those apps that I have in my system. I just have a gardening app. That's the only one I've created in this org. So I just select that, and the package is then ready for me to pull down from Salesforce. So when I created the package, it just lists all the things that are inside my app. So it's got custom fields. It's got list views, it's got the app itself, it's got any custom objects as well. So all the things there, very easy for me to kind of just pull down a version. So how are we going to actually get that done? Well, I'm going to show you how to do it with the command line interface. It's not that difficult. You can actually just use one command, so you can probably kind of remember that, hopefully. You can get the command line tool from Force CLI website. And just choose whichever version you want for your operating system. And this tool uses OAuth. So again, it's using a secure way to connect to your Salesforce org. And so Salesforce knows it's a trusted thing that it can give some information to. We wouldn't want you to just be able to use it to anybody's Salesforce org, because you could then pull down anybody's objects, and that wouldn't be a good thing. So we're using OAuth. So if you do force login, then it brings up a web page. So you type force login on the command line, it brings up a web page. You log into your org, then you select allow, and then it says yes, successful, and then you can use the Force.com tool to be able to pull down the package. So here I'm changing into my S1 gardening app directory. I do force login, and then I'm going to fetch the package. So you could actually just use force fetch. You could just use this command. You don't need to do login, because when you use this command, it actually asks you to log in anyway if you haven't already done so. So if it was more than 30 minutes since you logged in, it will ask you to log in again. But basically, I'm using the Force tool to fetch a package called Dreamforce Hack, and I want it to unpack it into all the XML, separate XML files. So it just makes it easier. So rather than being a zip file, it just makes it easy for me to compare, for Git to compare all the changes that I have. All these slides are online as well, and on GitHub, on SlideShare. So basically, yeah, so I've done force fetch package, and it's exported it to just a folder called metadata. And then I can version that metadata. So when I've done that, my GitHub for Mac, in this case, has seen all those changes that it's pulled down. It's seen a whole bunch of new files. Say, hang on a second, you've got new stuff. Do you want to add that to a new version? And I can select all, or I can select just a small part of it. Maybe I just want to add like a custom object I've worked with first. I want to make it a very specific version. Okay, I've just created a new object. I want to keep my version nice and simple so that somebody else can just add that object to us, and I'll maybe add the other ones later on. Or I can decide, well, everything is kind of related, so I want to add it all together. So then I can select it. So you can be very selective. I could create one commit out of all these changes, or I could create several commits out of the changes here. And so the only thing you need to do is provide it a commit message. This is very important because these commit messages form up the history of all the changes. A simple little piece of text that actually describes why you've made that new version. So I can say, this is a new project that's managing gardening, and I add my gardening app and I add my plant object and my variety object, and then I can commit it all, and other people can then look at what I've created. So here I've just done an initial project, and then I'm going to also ask it to, as well as commit locally, I'm also going to be very lazy and say, well, just share it as well, so I have less buttons to press. So this little button says, not just commit it locally, but also share and synchronize it with my repository on GitHub. And then I press commit and sync, and then off it goes. And I can see my history. So these are all over time, each commit you do, you build up a history of all the changes, and then you can go back and have a look at all the details of those changes and see exactly what's changed step by step. There we go. Is there any questions so far? Does that seem fairly easy? Oh, we've got a question at the back. There's a microphone there if you want to squish through.
So do you put only the metadata or the actual code as well? Do you download both metadata and the code, or just the metadata?
Yeah, so if you don't have the code already local, then you would also have to download that as well. So if you've been writing Visualforce or Apex, and you've been using the developer console, then you'd also pull that down as well. If it's part of your app, if you created an app in the first place, and it's all part of the app, then it should be pulled down as well. But if you've done it separately, then you would pull that down separately as well.
So it can be the same workspace folder?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so if you're using an app, then it will give you a default folder structure already, but there's no need to you don't have to stick with that if you don't want to. If you have your own scheme, then that's perfectly fine as well. Okay. So where to go next? There we go. So there is a lot more discussion about the CLI on Tuesday. That's today, at 5 o'clock. There's also, we have a cheat sheet in using Git as well. So you can learn more about it as well. And I'm starting to do some blogs on azureforce.co.uk, which is my new website. I'm from the UK, that's why it's co.uk. And so I'm going to talk more about how to do more things in a more agile way with Salesforce as well. There's a lot of information out there already, but I want to kind of put it into one place as well. So this is just the start of basically how to start versioning your code and your metadata with Salesforce. So hopefully you got some idea that it can be quite easy to do. So hopefully go give it a try. If you get stuck, then it may be just the tools that you're using that you're not happy with. So try a few different tools. You've got a few different choices. If you're already using a tool already, see how that can help you work with Git already. Force.com IDE has a Git plugin that you can use, so does Maven's Mate. But if you're doing it more manually, if you're using Force.CLI, then there's the GitHub for Windows tools as well. And I think that's... oh, thank you very much. That's my end of my talk. Thank you.